Welcome to Selling Circular, the podcast dedicated to exploring the innovative minds and business models shaping our transition to a circular economy. I'm Garr, CEO of LoopLayer.
I'm Sabira, Lakhani, VP of Product at Tech.
And today we're diving into a conversation that spans everything from AI-powered supply chains to the unexpected drama of circular economy fiction. Yeah, you heard that right. Circular economy fiction.
We are joined by Deborah Dull, who is probably the most prolific writers in the circular supply chain space at the moment. She's released not just one, but two books. One is a comprehensive guide on circular supply chains and a business novel featuring a character named Maya who tackles supply chain disruptions in London.
Yeah, that's the circular drama. What's fascinating about Deborah's approach is that she's tackling the circular economy from multiple angles. So she's got the books, but then also she's got the maturity models, which you can basically think of as like the step-through process type of orientation, and has about 60 of them to help companies figure out where they are in their circular journey and what their next step should be. It's that sort of business choose-your-own-adventure for professional supply chain folks.
And so Deborah's challenging some of the sacred cows of the circular economy movement, not just through her writing, but in her organization as well. She questions whether we really need digital product passports, and she's asking hard questions about whether tracking every component's history might actually create more of an environmental burden than we've thought through.
So as you'll see, she brings up this critical point about how the circular economy community may not really be doing itself a favor and might have shot itself in the foot by trying to create these incredibly high standards for tracking and provenance that don't exist in linear systems. So like most companies really can't see past even their first tier suppliers, but now suddenly we're trying to think through, okay, how do we then get all of the layers for refurbished parts as opposed to just trying to connect them to refurbished parts, which, Sabira, you actually might know something about.
Starting to. Learning. And the timing of this conversation is, chef's kiss. We're seeing this shift where a circular economy, especially because of the political climate, we're not just thinking about it from a sustainability perspective, but there is also this national security angle, material independence lens. And Deborah shares how she's been having conversations with the Department of Defense and the angle of circularity as a way to think about how our infrastructure, our streetlights, how they continue working, how our water systems continue functioning.
So between all of the then good conversations about our national security and circular economy, we also then talk about the circular supply chain network, which Deborah started in COVID when it was just her and a friend that kind of, as you'll see, forced her to just take that next step. And she now has about 20 to 25 volunteers. I got to show up to one recently. It's a good vibe for just talking more about circular economy stuff. This is what we try to do on the pod, and it was fun to have it live. Mm-hmm. They're working with everything from supporting initiatives actually in Kentucky and Tennessee to potentially launching a cooperative soon that really focuses on circular supply chain acceleration.
And that was one thing that kind of stood out for me is that she was really thinking about and passionate about the workforce. Who are the people who can contribute to the circular economy, like skilled repair technicians, especially as they've retired. So many have retired during COVID. Yes. We have this massive brain drain, and you have this opportunity for people to learn quickly with the support of AI and get degrees in those skilled trades to be able to uplift workforces in areas where we don't have that kind of investment in the people.
Yeah, I think I go on a little bit of rant somewhere in there in the middle of this episode, and then we got a nice pregnant pause from you two on okay, yep, Garr, totally get it. But nonetheless, I think it's absolutely valid. I mean, we just need to keep training people. I think the future is physical, and we need people to be ready for those skills. So whether you're trying to figure out how to scale your circular business, wondering about what that role of AI is, both in the future and supply chains and circular economy, or again, just curious about circular economy drama and what Maya's going to get up to in the book, this conversation has it all. Let's go ahead and dive in. Let's start with you being an open book. Let's start with opening your book. How's that for a transition right in the beginning?
Nailed it.
Haven't had the opportunity to read it, so I'm not going to pretend like I have yet, but I'm excited to crack it open. when you talk about your first book to the second book, what were you not seeing in the market where you're like, this does need to be addressed? There does need to be a voice out there that's saying something around supply chain and circular economy. Why does even a book sort of become the first go-to resource where you want to say, this is where I should put my voice?
Really good question. Very, very valid question. And something I asked myself many times after
Yeah, while you're
I
writing it.
agreed to do this. So for the clear, there's a half book in between the books. My good friend
Cool.
Douglas Kent and I wrote Sustainable Supply Chain Orchestration, which is lovely and came out about a year ago. So that's a kind of a half book. But between the first book that came out 5 years ago, if you can imagine, and this one, what happened was a marvelous publisher called Kogan Page asked me to write a book. So funny. I said, yeah, I already wrote that book. It has the exact same name that you want this book to be called. And I'm not interested. And they said, oh, but wouldn't you love to write a very, very long book on the same topic? And I talked to a couple of my close friends about this, one of whom got his PhD in circular supply chains and performance management. His name's Dennis. He lives in the Netherlands. And we had a long conversation about this book. And he said, do you really need to write it? And I said, no, and I really prefer not to write it. But my fear is if those of us, call us purists or not, of circular supply chain, who believe that the smaller circles are happier circles, meaning in the butterfly diagram, the less we do to a material and a product before we put it back into a value stream, the better. We have better margins, better service levels, the material does better, the product performs better. And I worried that if one of us didn't write it, it would end up being a book on recycling. So I said, Dennis, do you have time to write a book? And he said, absolutely not, as he was finishing his PhD. So I said, all right, I think I'm writing a book. And that whole process actually was a couple years ago. And so the whole process is lengthy, working with a publisher. I'm used to self-publishing. And what we decided on was the first chapter is really a crash course into how did we end up here? So what are the big supply chain moments through the last 100 years or so? Including when did our factories get so efficient? And that's really thanks to wartime activities, for example. When did advertising come up? So then we needed to start responding to changes in demand. And all the way through the who's who in people and organizations for the circular economy. So if you're new to the space, you should probably know who Walter Stahel is. You should probably know who Interface is. And the companies that we all understand because we've been around it a lot, but for people who are learning for the first time, it's an eye-opener. And then I go in and I define capabilities that are needed to create a circular supply chain. And there's across people, process, technology, standards, and governance. And I think we don't spend enough time on standards and governance. And so what I say isn't always what you mean. And we don't have a structure to make sure we're all doing what we said we would. And I lay those 15 capabilities out, and we look at it across 4 lenses, including repair, including urban mining. And so what you end up with is 6D maturity models to go and rate your own supply chain. So there's questions to go and ask your team. Based on their answers, you can find where you are. And based on where you are, you get your next step. So more or less, besides that first grounding chapter, it's a choose your own adventure book. You open it up, you get an idea of where you are, you get your next step, and you close it back up again. So it's not necessarily a cover to cover read, but it's a resource guide for people who are really, truly trying to take that next step.
Well, really, for all those professionals who I think we engage with or even have these problems ourselves every once in a while, where you just need somebody or something to bounce an idea off, get some input, and then work it to your specific problem. You're the professional, you're going to do this, but you sometimes just need somebody to go like, no, this is what we saw. This is how maybe you can think about this and get that extra bit of encouragement or advice or some sort of practical roadmap to make that happen.
Yeah. There's over 100 examples also. So folks who want to say, like, show me somebody else who's doing this. Then there's real live examples. I'm excited for a couple years from now when that needs to be updated, but it's the most up to date that I could find at the point of publishing.
But this is different than the novel that you wrote.
Yes. Thank you so much for that transitional question. So as I was writing 60 maturity models, I worried that the joy and exploration and discovery of supply chain wasn't going to come through. And so I wrote a short vignette, like a couple paragraphs at the beginning, of a made-up person solving a made-up problem. And my publisher said, sure, we can put that in there. They call it a fictional narrative. And I couldn't stop thinking about this idea of what if people could really start to connect to and see their day-to-day challenges reflected back in a business novel. I am not a novelist. Like many supply chain students, I read The Goal in college, which is a fairly long novel, actually, that teaches the theory of constraints to students. And it's marvelous, and we all get it after we read this book. And I've wanted to write something like that then for the last 20 years since I read this book. So Claude AI and I spent 3-4 months together imagining what this fictional world would look like. And we settled on a gal called Maya. She lives in London. She starts these capabilities because their entire production came to a standstill due to a port strike, and a really inexpensive industrial seal couldn't make it through the border, and that just their entire supply chain fell over. And so she basically said, look, this is silly. Why are we stopped because of this little piece that we could make domestically? And they say, fine, have at it. And so then that one thing leads to another. And then she continues to say, look, well, then why aren't we repairing our own items? And why aren't we fabricating the parts? And actually, why aren't we urban mining? Because we have all the materials here that we need. And so one thing leads to another, and the snowball grows. There's pending lawsuits. There's a small amount of
Gotta be some drama.
But I really don't like plot, and stresses me out. So it all ends well. It's a nice, fun, it's all filler, no filler. It's a really
so the hallmark of supply chain drama. It's going to end well.
100%.
Yes. Okay. Got it.
There's plenty of supply chain drama. And anyway, it's a fun read. It takes about 90 minutes and brings to life. It's, instead of having bullet points on a slide that say, augmented reality repair assistance and knowledge webs and these concepts that we all are building out, it's a way more fun way to connect to the story.
I have so many questions about the circular economy piece, but first, tell us why you chose to write it with AI.
I am not a novelist.
That's it. So you just wanted to
I
get
wanted it
the thing out there.
Yes, exactly. I would be writing it for the next 4, 5, 6 years, and it would not be very good.
Also,
I put it out. I can write nonfiction. I mean, I can write you.
Yeah.
Give me a talk. Give me circular. I'm actually writing another book because I can't help myself now on agentic supply chains and self-driving supply chains. I can write that. That's fine for me. But interesting prose are not my forte.
Well, and I think too, I mean, there's something I haven't shared much about with the audience and you all actually too about what I've got coming out, but being somebody who's deeply working in this space, I have very much appreciated just having some type of partner who's able to stay up with me or do anything and that is a piece that I am not waiting lightly on just my own sanity of just feeling like somebody is able to listen to me and volley with me late at night. And it's like, that is just so huge. And so I can imagine too, when you're like, what is Maya going to do here? And then, you get some answers and you're like, I don't love that. How do I do this? And so it's just, I keep pushing people to push their own personal boundaries with playing with it, even though, I mean, there's a lot of energy and water intensive behavior in it, but it's worth it, I think, socially for us to start to play with these concepts and get comfortable with AI, because as you're writing, the agentic future is coming.
Totally. And what's funny, I really can't help myself with writing, you guys. This is terrible. I am happily also contributing a chapter to a book that'll come out next year on AI and sustainability. And my book chapter is on, can AI ever be circular? So I'm looking at the physical side of AI to say, we're going to have to make it circular is really the answer, because this is the way of the world. And if we don't want to end up in the matrix and all of us are energy sources for these things, then we're going to have to find another way. So we should probably think about these frameworks. And there's a lot of really early optimistic signs that, of course, it's possible. But these big capabilities don't build themselves overnight.
Well, and then speaking about the infrastructure on that, I mean, are we talking circular of servers, of what, of the water, the energy? Or is that what we're talking about, of sort of maintaining that circular nature so that we don't become
Exactly.
the energy bags for?
Exactly right.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I would do well in the Matrix.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the scary part is we wouldn't know, would we? I mean, at a
Oh.
certain point, it's just the switch gets
Yeah.
flipped. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that is a good future to call out. Where is this? Essentially, where does the AI component of this actually happening in real time? I mean, actually, when doing the research, saw you're already having a bunch of conversations around AI and circular economy. What are those conversations like at the corporate level? I mean, where is this actually taking place where we're starting to have these sort of kicking around these concepts?
Yeah, I think one of the most in supply chains, I think
Yeah, in supply
the
chains. Yeah.
most compelling areas is actually workforce assistance and workforce development, where, for example, trying to keep our assets running or even repairing items for the municipality. A lot of our repair technicians took early retirement during COVID. And so we have a huge brain drain that has left on the person that looked after that one machine for the last 25 years and knows every thunk and every shift and every buzz. And we don't have that anymore. And so Rockwell Automation is one that's doing this already, and it will grow in terms of having augmented reality assistance for handy technicians, but may not know their way around that specific asset. So that's one that I know is coming out. I spend a lot of my free time with an organization between Tennessee and Kentucky called Game Change. They're looking at this type of capability for how do you upskill the workforce there in order to increase the capabilities around digital manufacturing, so harvesting and repair and reman, recycling and so forth, in order to increase the value of American goods on the basis of national security, which I think is also a really interesting conversation to have. So I think the workforce area is certainly a big one. There's also some really interesting just middle office and back office type work. If we look at the way that assets are dispositioned today, it's often just at the whim of whoever has custody of that asset. So we have a huge warehouse filled with hunks of metal and ideally some other precious goods inside, maybe some motors and moving parts. But there's no formal system to manage those, to prioritize those, to figure out what we can harvest, where it is. And so we have this dark space, this limbo area that is mostly managed in Excel today. Those pieces of processes that have been so unique that there's no market for a software company to come and solve for that right now. We can now solve for that because this world of agentic solutions thrives in repetitive but custom spaces. And that's where I spend a lot of my time. I do a lot of agentic services in my day job across the whole supply chain, but this space, especially in after sales, on the best pricing that we can offer for different spare parts and how to do that dynamically and on the fly. We just announced a partnership with a company called Synchron, who does just really specializes in that space, pricing in particular. And so we have these little pieces that are all out there, but aren't necessarily under one platform. And I think that's a great space for AI as well. And conversations I am having. We also have asset inspection through machine vision. There's a drone company out of Switzerland called Verity who we work with, and they can do asset inspection, which is just fantastic because today a lot of times you bring something in for it's a human being looking at an item to say this looks like rust or this is a dent or this looks like wear. And so the way that we can scale the after sale space and give it second and third and nth lives is that we have to rely on, it's not really Gen AI, it's more deep learning, which
Right.
encompasses Gen AI, but that
Yeah.
piece and the technologies that come along with it, I don't know how we're going to scale the after sale space without it.
Well, I think that's been one of the biggest barriers, and to sort of draw that out a little bit for the audience. I mean, this is because one of the biggest barriers is labor cost. in doing that type of inspection. And when you're doing it at a scale of many assets and asset types, it just becomes prohibitive to actually then build a system. And this is one of those that we are innovating ourselves into this opportunity through AI. And yeah, I think it's going to be both incredible for what we can build with circular economy, but then we do have to figure out the human component of that as well. And that's, I know that's going to be a challenge, but it's something we just have to prioritize in this.
Totally. I
Yep.
think it offers a non-4-year degree path. Frankly, I would love to see a re-embracing of trade schools across the US that happens in other countries. I think particularly given the circumstances around student debt in this country and how we handle it, there has to be another path for people to become considered skilled labor. And again, I'm hearing great partnerships between, um, 3D printing type machines and community colleges so that they can be certified in how to use those asset types when they graduate with their AA degree. And so those types of workforce development enabled by this shared knowledge space is absolutely under discussion right now. A lot of other conversations on material science are certainly happening. So providing a body of knowledge and asking for innovation and brand new material types that can be processed better, maybe don't leak PFAS and microplastics all over the world. And so those types of use cases, of course, but those are absolutely live and absolutely happening today.
I wonder, like, to me, there's like this overlay, right? You kind of mentioned in your book, and you talk about like in the maturity models, there's like, what did you say, process, people,
Technology, standards, and governance.
right? So like, um, when you talk about AI, and that's like the technology, we kind of just talked about people too. Um, and when I think about when we're talking about like the world of spare parts, like I'm new to this world, but one thing that seems like a big bear is that the data about the stuff of what we are looking at, right, is just like masked at multiple levels. And so even if like AI and agents can help clarify, that is still like a huge investment. And that comes from the linear model of OEMs and their dealers or suppliers not being willing to just kind of be straightforward of like, here's what we make and like here's the number and like here are the details about it. And then I think about, like what iFixit is standing for. And you need knowledge, spare parts, right? And the tools available to actually repair things and keep them alive and maximize the utility of them. So I guess I'm curious of your point of view is like, okay, we know there's like the people element, we have the technology element, but like, are organizations shifting how they're thinking in the supply chain to collaborate together more to get circular outcomes, or are the linear incentives too strong to prevent them from doing so?
I think that becomes a tension point. Sharing isn't a decision the supply chain makes. That's done at a corporate level. And so it's not like there's chief supply chain officers saying, I won't share about the parts that we make. 'Cause that's not what they do. Um, what I think is hard for supply chains is that the burden of proof for the circularity space is like 1,000 times higher than for new parts. And I think we did it to ourselves. I think without being asked, we cooked up the idea of a digital passport and that we have to know if a paper clip has been used before. And in fact, we need a persistent ID and we need a QR, we need a 2D barcode. Like we have to do it, and it should be an app, and we should have that app, and that app should be shared with everybody. We were not asked to do that. Like we did that as a circularity community. And I think we really shot ourselves in the foot because in a linear world, a supply chain is made up of dozens of companies from planet to shelf, none of whom work for each other. This is the amazing part about a supply chain to me, that it even functions to begin with. Most supply chains can't see past their first tier supplier. So their supplier, only 15% even know who their supplier is. Go one more step, that drops to 2%. Big companies might have 100,000 direct suppliers. So even going one step back, we're now in the millions and millions. And then you go 20 steps back to the planet, we're talking about hundreds of millions of companies involved. And it's a pipe dream that we're ever going to make it back there, right? But for a refurbished part, all of a sudden we decide that we need to know what happened during its entire 20-year lifespan on an asset that never moved off of a factory floor. And I've had this discussion on like, why does provenance matter? And why does genealogy matter? And at what point can we declare something reset? And does it really matter that a spare part was used before? And in some cases, sure, it doesn't. And in some cases, it doesn't. It matters the condition that it's in. And then we start the conditioning and grading process that we know today is manual, but with visual inspection and science. Some innovators are starting to take the subjectivity out of that. And all of that long thing to say, I just wonder about the operational reality and benefit to some of the capabilities that we've decided that we need, when in reality, in a factory, to force uniqueness into a production process that's handling millions of components and millions of parts is not tenable, even with all the technology in the world. And then to what end? The server space to hold that is probably a higher burden than the widget we're making to begin with.
Yeah.
So we've got to figure out how to balance the bed that we've made for ourselves to lie.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, like this debate I've had about that briefly and then in here also at Spare Tech, which is there is still like, there's, I think, a difference when you're talking about provenance, right, and genealogy. There's like the difference between this unique thing that I'm holding in my hand versus the data about it, not that particular thing, but the product in general that could help a person make a decision, right? Like,
Totally fair.
what are the dimensions? What does it do?
Yes.
What do I need to do to repair it, right? Like those are like the kind of overarching consistent data that, but even that is not available, right? And so like we're kind of struggling we have to kind of make that up in the world. And I think, yeah, on the spectrum of specific to non-specific, I have come to the more non-specific side. But I guess like I wonder, like there isn't the movement to get there isn't coming from the supply chain. It's going to be third party players who are going to try to create that information and then build on top of it. I love what you said about like visual inspection.
Yeah.
If you have the combination of like, what is this thing? Do I have the data about it? And then like this particular one, and can I assess it? That's so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's not coming from the OEMs.
Unless they take a strategy to do so. So if we take like the Apple story, they used to super glue their phones shut, and if you open it up, you voided the warranty, and now they are heralding the right to repair space. Surface is heading towards a fix your own, and they've announced, of course, the relationship with iFixit so that people can upgrade their own computers. And so it's going to have to come from a space. And if we think again with our business P&L hat on, why would I spend hundreds of millions of dollars to develop a product and then give it all away? And this is the piece of, we need to have a reconciling of the vision that we want in the world, and it absolutely is the direction that we're going in, and then the operational reality of how do the businesses we're asking to do this continue to exist. Granted, many of them have plenty of money and they can exist for many, many, many years. And in order to get something across the line, you got to have a business case. So the shift in strategy, and we can go back and look at the beginnings of the CAT Remand program and understand that there is a lot of money in that, but it's not an overnight strategy decision. And so then we start in with, okay, so the OEM is probably having to be involved in some way. If it's truly going to scale, they're going to have to either partner with a certified reman or harvesting partner at the end of the day, or we have to figure out how to make a business around lower margin. So let's say we're going to harvest and figure out what to do with all these components. That becomes harder to do. I think in the next 10 to 15 years, we'll see more common platforming across products to allow cross OEM repairs. But then we have to acknowledge, what are they going to compete on? And that's the piece that, that's the big open question. I think
they're so scared of.
You do, of course. And again, think about the amount of technology that we're communicating through right now. That's the basis of their business. And so we've got to figure out what is usable. And I think that's why recycling ends up having such a loud voice in this space, though we know it's the lowest value. It's the common language.
Right. Well, it's also, I would be curious. It's the reset. It's it's like, oh no, it just wipes the slate of any IP. And it's like, great, we can send it there. We don't have to worry about we just keep pumping it out and we'll get some components back and just kind of keep figuring that out.
Totally. And I think to some extent, I've said it many, many times before, we're going to be mining landfill. And the first time I said it, people thought it was nuts. And now people say, of course we will. And that's a great space for how do we take mixed resources and mine it truly. But my fear in this, and always has been, if we do that, let's say we fix urban mining tomorrow, we wouldn't change a thing about our supply chains. It would still take 240,000 miles for a phone to reach our shelf before we ever even turn it on. And a pair of jeans goes 40,000 miles. A computer chip crosses 7D borders before it even goes into its product. And so our global supply chains are long, and length means disruption. Every time it crosses a border, every time something's in motion. And maybe that's not going to change for a long time. I think for brand new products, we're going to continue to see the supply chains that we've built out, especially over these last, call it 70 years. But for the repair space, that can be done regionally and locally. And there needs to then be a recognition that there's going to be a new AI-fueled economy and industry around this space. And it may not be the OEM. I think smart OEMs are getting behind it and figuring out how to partner so that they can make money off of spare parts and they can make money off of these platforms. And once everybody has an iPhone, for example, what do you do next besides sell them more apps? You can let them upgrade, and that becomes a lifelong engagement. So I think this shift is fascinating. And in order to really scale, the circularity community has got to also anchor into the fact that we are in a capitalist society right now. And I think we probably will be for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about capitalism lately, and mostly around market dynamics too. And I'm going to sort of maybe focus this into the domain that I'm very specifically focused on, which is building materials and deconstruction and building material reclamation. And I've just been fascinated by. I was having this conversation today about. That somehow building material reclamation can exist in two types of markets. You can have at the same time a for-profit motion in which direct to reuse means someone's buying materials right from the source, while also in the same geography, in the same market, have a non-profit supported market in which someone needs to get grant funding to operate a physical location to accept material in and then resell it back to someone else. And something hit me when you were sort of mentioning that we've sort of built some of these higher concept digital product passports, some of these higher things. We're doing this to ourselves, and it hit me in there where it was like, all I'm trying to do for what I'm trying to solve is just make a healthy market function. You can do whatever you want in whatever fidelity you want, to the degree of granularity where you can find out anything you want about a product, as long as it's going to make money. If it's going to make money, then people will say, oh, I need to know who owned this for the last 6 ownerships. But if it's not even a healthy market, it doesn't matter. And so if it's like, if just getting the enough of those materials back, and either that is building materials or even spare parts, just getting them back into ownership to figure out how you can make money off of it, that's where then you can then start to layer on all the complexity. But I'd love those conversations right now where people are like, we need all this stuff. And it's like, why? This market doesn't even work. We need to figure out how to get this market working before we do all that.
Yeah, and then how would we do it also?
And how
And
would
the
we do it?
real, I do think sometimes we forget the cloud is a real space. And so when we say we want all this information, is the juice worth the squeeze in the end? You know, are we going to actually cause more harm finding out and keeping this information about all these different tiers in the supply chain than the item actually causes itself? So basically, is it better just to make a brand new one
Right.
or
Right.
track all this information about a used one? And that's a tough one to sit with. And it's tough to find the answer because not a lot of people have actually studied the space, and academics is behind often because you have to go through a peer review process and the publishing process. And so it's behind often where the market is. So it's tough to come up with the numbers.
Yeah.
And back to our AI friends, that's actually an interesting way to partner with math to do these simulations and say, what might it cost? How do we build a simulation around this? And how might I approximate the total and environmental cost of doing whatever type of tracking I want to go and do?
Okay, speaking of then, in terms of projecting and modeling, I really do struggle with total addressable markets for circular economy. It is for anybody who's in a startup world or for anybody who's trying to get a business case, we can project anything we want. And we can probably have some logic to back it up. But I really struggle with, I mean, when somebody asks me about what I'm doing and I have to somehow explain, well, this is the market I see. Well, that's a lot of assumptions. What do you think about all the assumptions that are supporting sort of circular economy, and how do we back those up? I used to get made fun of a lot for saying the trillion, sort of the trillion monetary number when it comes to circular economy, but it's like, that can be kind of flimsy. Where do you fall in line with that?
Economics are a series of assumptions put together. So I think that's the field of economics. And speaking of which, I would actually love for more economists to come and hang out in the circular economy space. I think we have a
Totally.
lot of circular and not a lot of economy sometimes. Um, Look, I think I think TAMs are hard anyway. TAMs are hard in all places. I was a product manager for a long time. TAMs are hard. And I think the simplest, most elegant way is always the best. And so if we're saying we're in building materials, so are we going to do municipalities, or are we going to do office spaces, or are we going to do industrial, or are we going to do manufacturing? Great. That's a starting point. And then we make assumptions of how many come down every year. You can pretty much find that. And we can make assumptions about 1 in 100 might even consider possibly not just demoing the whole building. Okay. So now we start with, a realistic assumption of people we might be able to reach to even let them know that there's another option. And then you can start in with your assumptions of how do I get to those people? And there's associations and there's builders groups and there's conferences that you can go and say, look, there's another way. And in fact, I'm going to pay you so that you don't have to pay to haul this away. I'm just going to come and pick it up. And so then you can start to make approximations, and then you could go to a conference and go like, is this interesting to you? Click a button and then say like, I talked to 140 people in a day. So you can start to do your own market studies, which are they defensible? I don't know. That's up for your investors to figure out. But having this anchoring into, I understand who my buyer might be. I understand how they make decisions. And I understand who makes money in which ways in this exchange. And I'm not sure a lot of people sit to answer those questions. I had a debate the other day on yet another circularity platform and the materials exchange platform. There's already 250 plus. Peter Evans does his research on this and always launches the more and more and more. And my question was, look, if your buyer are big companies, Fortune 400 companies, they don't buy on platforms. They buy from approved vendors. It's really hard to get on that list, and those are the only people they're allowed to buy from. So unless your platform is approved as an approved vendor, that's not going to be a viable path. And so that TAM is not your TAM. So those types of, have you ever gone to talk to a procurement person? Maybe try that first of
Yeah.
going and experiencing and learning and asking how they make their decisions and then how everybody makes money in exchange. And anyway, it's simple stuff, but I think we sometimes don't go and try to answer those questions.
Well, that's the playbook. And so for anybody listening, I mean, thinking about your TAM, thinking about what you're trying to solve, that's the playbook. And I love where you bring in procurement and these systems that, again, at the corporate level, of which you then have to be approved. You can choose to react, and then Sabira, I'd love a question too after this. But I'm kind of becoming more and more obsessed with this agentic reality that I think is coming, in which fewer and fewer humans are making those decisions actively on what is being procured, and they are more and more focused on uh, the designs, what needs to be procured. And if it's a trusted source, then it's on the platform and it will just be automatically pulled in to those procurement decisions. And then fewer and fewer, again, of those humans will be making the verifiable decisions in that. And the more removed we get from circular economy that can speak that language and be connected into those systems, the more and more it might get left behind.
Cool.
That's fine too.
Yes.
I can leave on that. Dead air's dead air. It's a podcast. I can edit that out.
I was giving the option for a follow-up question.
Great. No follow-up question there.
Not for me.
I mean, yeah, that's like isn't getting you.
Like,
well, but it is. Like, that's the funny part I think about bringing in diehard operations people is that at the end of the day, we need to follow the following 8, 9, 25 steps. And so what exactly it is that we're asking people to do differently than what they're doing today. And that's where I think the process of getting this book out into the world is 15 capabilities across 4 different lenses. And and then I went to the Circularity Conference this year and saw you there. And part of the conversations have moved really, really well and are moving into this space of like practically, tactically, what is it that we're all doing? And let's share. And can you share the name of that vendor? And can you share your process? But some of the conversations were still very much like on the why we need to do this. And it's like, folks, we're here. We're ready to go. We're all convinced, I hope, since we've paid money to be in this room. And so that's the piece that it's like, who are the next group of stakeholders that then let's go and engage with? And right now, I'm seeing a lot of success in what I'll call accidental circularity. That sometimes we don't call it that. A whole land of disposition would never actually know that they're interacting with the circular economy. In the novel, it's not called circular economy. She just goes after fixing her problem and coming up with another way to source the goods for her supply chain. The keynote that I do on that is an hour, and I don't say the word circularity until minute 48. And people get everything else, and they go like, oh, is that what this is all about? And I think some of it is the environment we're in right now, for better or worse. I think right now a little bit for worse. Somehow when the original stakeholder groups for circularity got together, it wasn't operations people, it was sustainability people. I, of course, always look at this as how do I fuel my supply chain and how do we fuel the economy? What are we going to put into it? And if we can't get it from the planet, we have to get it from something else. And that somewhere else is probably going to be other supply chains. But a lot of it has also been how do we save the planet and how do we make sure that we don't take every last ounce out of the planet, which is also a fantastic argument to get to the table. The problem then is there's a backlash against sustainability right now. And so because circularity has been grouped in, because circularity usually reports through a chief sustainability officer, now there's a backlash on circularity, which is so interesting because it's national security, material independence. It's a land of how do we actually unwind ourselves from China. And so the conversations that I've had about national security, of course, resonate. I mean, it was last year at South by Southwest, I was on a Dodd-sponsored fireside chat, actually, about circularity for national security. And then earlier this year, I sat with Doug Adams from the Institute for National Security and Defense out of Vanderbilt. And we had a marvelous conversation about what does this mean for national security. And you could talk about national security like defense, or you could talk about national security like functioning. Will our streetlights work?
Will it just work?
Can we just function? Can we run business across society?
Yeah.
And that's a piece that, there's a really funny parody from years ago that's like a fake movie trailer for keeping infrastructure running, because nobody wants to talk about water systems or treatment plants or energy grids until we don't hear about it until a fire happens or something happens and it goes down and nobody has water, and we think, isn't that terrible? So anyway, there's this really funny parody video. I'll try to find it for the show notes. That's in the style of and then at the last moment, the spare part arrives, like very dramatic. But it's those types of conversations that that's the national security I think about, of do we have water for our citizens? Do we have energy when you go flip the light on? And all of the components needed to run that are imported today. So if we think about what security means for the nation, then one version might be, how is it even possible for us to run that internally? So anyway, those conversations, that's heavy on my mind right now, this accidental circularity. So what are other words? And it's everything in the re-universe, of course, of talking about reman and refurb, MRO, and which are industries that have been around for a really long time. And they know what they're doing, and they usually do it in Excel. And so how do you spend the space to connect and supercharge this industry that I suspect will grow very quickly, especially as we have more dynamic tariff situations?
Yeah. I think, like you're touching on kind of like the problem that we're facing is our own branding, right? Circular economy and being associated with sustainability. That's part of the problem. But like I saw you talk about circularity, and even now when you're speaking, it's all like very practical things that have nothing to do with sustainability, right? Like they have everything to do with as we're saying, like to keep functioning. And I guess maybe all this is leading me to like, well, tell us a little bit about the origin story of the supply chain, a circular supply chain network, and how you were seeing the future already, many years ago, of like, this is going to be part of the conversation. So what was your aha moment? How did you actually bring it to life? And then like, what are y'all focusing on now? Is it evangelism or like doing projects? Just like, if the audience looked you up and they were like, what does she do? Like,
God,
tell us.
If anybody can figure that out, let me know. That would be awesome. So I found the circular economy because I interviewed for an industry analyst job. And during that interview process, I had to write a white paper on supply chain and the circular economy. And this is in 2018. And I Googled it, of course. And there were 3 total search results on the whole internet, all from Accenture, because they were super early to the game then. In
I
part
remember that.
with World Economic Forum, thanks to Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And of course, none of those names made any sense to me at all. And I tried to get through these papers on cascades, open cascades, and partial cascades, and closed loop and open loop. And anyway, I didn't get the job, which is great. I don't think either of us would have had a good long-term relationship there. But I couldn't stop thinking about that concept, because I spent a lot of time, of course, developing these ideas about what would it look like if a supply chain, what does it mean? What's this intersection between supply chain circularity and circularity impact on supply chain? And later that year, I was given stage space from a marvelous woman called Jenny Froome at a conference in South Africa. And I decided to try to fill an hour with, what does this mean? What would it mean? What does this intersection mean? And I filled a whole hour and said, that time I'm going to launch a page on LinkedIn called Circular Supply Chain and just see what happens. I didn't promote it. I didn't do anything. I just put it out in the world to see, as a litmus test, who would follow it. Fast forward a couple of years as COVID started. And have you ever had one of those weeks that you get the same message multiple times from different people and you're like, fine, So I got these phone calls one week of, you should start something in the circular supply chain. There's no space for it. And I was like, absolutely not. I cannot. No, I'm not interested. I'm too busy. I don't want to do that. And finally, my friend Sneha called and said, you really should start something. And I was like, no, who's going to come to these meetings that you think we should have? And she said, even if it's just you and me, it'll be worth it. And of course, pulled at my heartstrings. And
That's a good friend.
She's a good friend. She still comes to most team meetings. She's also
I'll clip that and you can send it to her.
The
We can just, yeah, exactly.
Construction space. So, but she was she's the OG volunteer. And so now we have 25 volunteers, about half of which show up to our team meetings every single week, which I continue to be absolutely shocked. I'm in awe when I get on our Google Meets and people show up. And we do a lot for us. We all have day jobs, and so it's not like we're a fully functional organization. Most recently, we've just finished responding to a probably no longer active DOE notice of funding for Circular Supply Chain Accelerator across the U.S. Official word is that they have paused all communication on said topic. But it doesn't really matter. We got almost 20 letters of commitment from public and private sector and big companies and small companies. We even got support from big nonprofits who don't usually support. And so we plan to turn that into a cooperative model and launch it anyway. So we're in the process of shifting our grant application to more of a pitch deck and to offer what it would be like a dividends model for investors, and then to go out and raise capital. We don't need a lot, but we should probably employ people to do this full time. So that's a big one. We spend a lot of time supporting Game Change, again, through Kentucky and Tennessee. Their fifth summit is on the 17th of September. And a couple of us will be speaking there, actually, thanks to the fact that my volunteers are pretty amazing. So one is Vivian Tai from GS1 US. She leads innovation for them. She'll be speaking. Another of my volunteers is Burjesh Krishnan, who works at Cummins in circular economy. He'll be coming. Another of my volunteers is Gerald Jackson of Oracle. He'll be coming and speaking. And so there's a lot of heart and soul and joy into seeing what we can do alongside these organizations that are moving. So we find ourselves in the middle of these types of engagements, and we do as well as we can. It's an interesting study on how much we can all get done in our spare time, but it's a great organization, and it just continues to grow and surprise me of what we can get done.
Well, that also speaks to, I think, community, right? It's like in this world, and part of the problem with the linear economy is how disconnected it can make us. And I mean, it's kind of like flies in the face of that, right? We just collaborate in our free time, and we can actually make big things happen.
Yep.
The humanness of circular economy. I'll just keep just human.
Full
It's the
circle.
only way.
It's the name of my novel. Full circle.
Yes. Yeah. With Maya. So again, check out the novel, check out the new book. Deborah, thanks for the time today. Round us out though real quickly on like what's giving you the most hope. I mean, you just talked to us about all the volunteers, but we're looking down the barrel of some really interesting years coming up. What gives you hope? Dead air. Yeah.
Well, it's, I don't mean to be dramatic. I'm trying to choose my words carefully.
Yeah.
Because some days it is tough, I think, to be hopeful and optimistic. After the election, I made a couple of choices on how I wanted to spend my time, and I decided to stay in the country and really aim to learn and understand. And so I spend most of my time in states that I have not previously spent most of my time in, and talking with people who I have not normally spent hours and hours around. And I maintain that people at the core, regardless of what the news says, people are kind. And, they want to help each other. And I think people try to do what's best for them and their family. I think talking about market failures and market dynamics, they don't always have all the information to make those decisions. But right now, I think the next couple of years are going to be really tough for those same people. And so how can we support and make a difference? And if so, what are the mechanisms and levers to go and do that? And that's what I spend my time thinking about. Of there's a lot of poverty in this country, and a circular economy offers good paying jobs and supportive skill development so that folks can get back to work in the communities where they already live if we move the work into those communities. And so this piece of people really are kind. And I know it doesn't feel like that a lot of times because of what we see and what the news shows us. But as I spend a lot of time talking to a lot of people, that's what gets me going still every day. But it is a tough world for people, especially as I've spent the last several years of my life thinking about this circularity space, which is now um, not necessarily accepted and not necessarily rejected, but trying to find a space of how can we still use these strategies to grow communities and have them stand on their own 2 feet. And that's the piece that I'm clinging on to. I'll call that my center of hope right now.
Good. Thank you, Deborah.
Thanks for having me on. It's good to see you.